So I want you to think about your daily digital diet for a second. Just the hyper-fast algorithms, the endless
Oh,
scroll.
absolutely. The notifications pinging every, what, 3 minutes?
Right, exactly. We live in the loudest, probably the most fractured era in human history. So how is it possible that one of the biggest viral trends to capture modern audiences is a style of music built on absolute silence, incredibly slow tempos, and texts that are like 1,000 years old?
It really feels like a paradox, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because we are totally addicted to speed, yet millions of people are putting on noise-canceling headphones to listen to contemporary sacred choral music.
And that right there is the mystery we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We've got a really fascinating playlist of 8 contemporary sacred choral tracks in front of us, and our mission today is to understand this massive yet incredibly quiet rebellion in the classical music world.
Yeah, and it's a huge journey.
It really is. We're going to travel from pristine British chapels to literal revolutions in the Baltics, and finally to these extreme audiophile recording setups in America. And it's all to decode why this music physically alters us when we listen to it.
Well, I mean, to understand why this music feels like a rebellion in the first place, you really have to look at what these composers were reacting against.
Right, the historical context.
Exactly. So, in the middle of the 20th century, the classical music establishment was obsessed with something called serialism or atonal music. And it was highly intellectual, but to the average listener, it was just completely alienating.
I've actually always heard atonal music described as sounding like a math equation, but I've never fully grasped why. What actually makes it sound so jarring to us?
So, traditional music is built on a hierarchy. There's a home chord, right? And everything you hear is either moving away from home to create tension or it's returning home to create resolution.
Okay, that makes sense.
But serialism threw that hierarchy completely out the window. Composers created these strict mathematical rules to ensure that all 12 notes in the scale were treated equally. So there is no home.
Wow, no home at all.
None. So your brain, which is, wired to look for patterns and resolutions, is constantly denied that comfort. It just feels anxious, unsettled.
So it's no wonder audiences felt disconnected. But then in the late 20th century, you get composers like Arvo Pärt, John Tavener, and Henryk Górecki who just say, enough.
Right. They completely abandon that modernist anxiety.
Yeah, and they start this movement called spiritual minimalism or holy minimalism. They essentially bypass the previous 100 years of music entirely and dig straight down into medieval and Renaissance sacred roots.
Because they realized that to move forward, they actually had to go backward. But they weren't just copying old music. They were stripping music down to its absolute bare essentials.
Let's actually define what that sounds like for a second. The defining feature of spiritual minimalism seems to be these incredibly long, sustained chords. And we see a lot of what's called modal harmony.
Yes, modal harmony is key here.
Right. So, for those of us who aren't huge music theory nerds, how is modal harmony different from, like, the pop songs we hear on the radio?
Think of a standard pop song like Driving on a Highway. You know exactly where you're going, there are clear signs, and you inevitably arrive at your destination. That's traditional tonal harmony.
Okay, driving on a highway. Got it.
But modal harmony, which traces all the way back to ancient Gregorian chant, it doesn't drive forward, it floats. It's like treading water in a vast, calm ocean.
Oh, that's a great image.
Yeah, the chords shift subtly, creating these gentle dissonance moments where the notes kind of rub against each other, but they resolve so incredibly slowly that time itself feels suspended.
And I imagine the dynamic range required to pull this off is just terrifying for audio engineers. This isn't music that stays at a comfortable medium volume.
Oh, not at all. It swings from a single voice hovering just above a whisper to an entire ensemble singing fortissimo, literally as loud as the human body can project.
Which is why capturing this music requires a completely different philosophy of recording.
Absolutely.
Right, and that brings us to the spaces themselves. On our playlist, we have 3 heavy lifting choirs. We've got Voces, the Latvian Radio Choir, and the St. Salvator's Chapel Choir.
And they are recording in massive ancient spaces.
Yeah, places like Hatfield House in England or cavernous stone churches in Riga. Now, in standard pop music, a singer usually stands in a tiny dead room covered in foam, right?
Yeah, an isolation booth.
Exactly. The producer records a completely dry vocal and then uses a computer to add artificial reverb later to make it sound stadium-sized. But in this genre, is it accurate to say the architecture of the building is literally acting as an extra singer in the choir?
It absolutely is. You cannot separate this music from the stone and wood it bounces off of.
Hmm.
A foam isolation booth is a sterile laboratory, but a 15th century chapel is a living ecosystem.
Wow, a living ecosystem. I love that.
Yeah, because every ancient stone room has its own unique acoustic fingerprint. How long it takes for the sound to decay, which frequencies resonate the loudest. An elite audio engineer doesn't fight the room, they respect it. They actually map it.
So they have to capture both things at once.
Exactly. They have to place the microphones meticulously to capture the precise, intimate friction of the individual singer's vocal cords, while simultaneously capturing the massive wave of sound washing back from a stone wall 100 feet away.
So you are quite literally listening to the building breathe, which perfectly sets up the British tradition of this music because so much of that tradition is about the physical spaces where the music is passed down.
Right, the preservation of it.
Take Voces 8, a British octet. We listened to their 2014 album, Lux. They are a professional, highly polished ensemble, right? Just two singers on each part. It's pristine. It almost acts as this perfect cultural product.
But then you contrast their sleek professionalism with the St. Salvator's Chapel Choir at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland.
Yeah, completely different vibe.
Completely. That chapel was founded in 1413. The singers there are students. So you aren't just hearing the natural reverb of ancient stone, you are hearing the texture of an institution where one generation of young people physically hands the tradition down to the next.
Year after year, century after century.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into the actual tracks. So Sir John Tavener's Mother of God, Here I Stand, performed by Voices 8. Tavener has one of the wildest resumes in classical music.
Oh, he really does.
He started out rubbing shoulders with pop royalty. He literally released a cantata on the Beatles' Apple Records label in 1968.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. But then mid-career, he completely pivots, converts to Russian Orthodoxy, and ends up writing the music that was sung as Princess Diana's coffin was carried out of Westminster Abbey.
And that conversion entirely rewired his approach to composition. This specific track is built on a 19th century Russian text by Lermontov, but it's actually just one tiny fragment pulled from a piece called The Veil of the Temple.
Right, and that larger work is, wait, it's an all-night vigil, right?
Yes, an all-night vigil that lasts 7 uninterrupted hours.
7 hours.
Mm.
My brain immediately tries to process how you keep an audience engaged for that long. And listening to this excerpt, the harmonic motion is so slow, it feels like all forward momentum has stopped entirely.
It really does.
It's almost as if, instead of asking us to watch a movie with the traditional narrative that moves from A to B, Tavener is asking us to stand in a museum and just stare deeply into a single musical painting.
That is the perfect way to visualize it, because Tavener openly designed his music to function exactly like a Russian Orthodox icon painting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in that tradition, an icon isn't just a picture. It's a window into the divine. It's meant to be gazed at to facilitate stillness. Tavener is using harmony to paint those icons in the air. He wants you to lose your sense of linear time.
Which is incredible. And we see a similar deep historical anchoring with the St. Salvator's Choir singing Hymn to the Virgin by James Macmillan. Now, Macmillan's music connects directly to Benjamin Britten, right? Britten wrote a famously beautiful setting of this exact same text back in 1930.
Yes, sitting in a 1,000-year tradition of Marian devotional music.
Right, and the text itself is a 14th century macaronic poem. What does macaronic actually mean in this context?
It simply means a text that mashes up two different languages. In this case, one line is sung in medieval English, and the responding line is sung in Latin.
It's like a musical time machine. The shifting back and forth between the English and the ancient Latin anchors you directly into that tradition.
And the British tradition is fundamentally about that polished preservation. It's about keeping a delicate flame alive in a beautifully curated lantern. But while the British were preserving this sound in pristine chapels over in Eastern Europe during the exact same era, this identical musical style became a literal tool for national survival.
This is where the history becomes incredibly visceral. Let's talk about the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania.
Right.
The Latvian radio choir, founded in 1940, is on our playlist, and their sound is distinctly different from the British choirs. It's leaner, it has this modern, bright, Eastern European clarity. And that sound was forged in a remarkably dark context.
The Soviet occupation.
Yes, from 1944 until 1991.
Under Soviet rule, national identity in the Baltics was heavily suppressed. but they couldn't ban singing entirely. So choral music became a Trojan horse. It became the central, unifying public expression of who these people were.
And that builds directly to the singing revolution from 1987 to 1991. We are talking about a few people in a basement here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about hundreds of thousands of citizens gathering in massive open-air amphitheaters to sing forbidden national songs as nonviolent resistance.
Think about the mechanics of what happens when 100,000 people sing together. It's a phenomenon called entrainment.
Entrainment, right?
Yeah, their breathing literally synchronizes. Their heart rates align. It was a staggering display of nonviolent resistance. They weaponized harmony to prove their unity, and they quite literally sang their way to independence.
And because of that history, the Baltic states today have an infrastructure of world-class choirs that is just unmatched. Now, one of the composers who lived through that crucible is Pāteris Vasks.
Yes, an incredible composer.
Born in 1946, son of a Baptist minister, which immediately put a target on his family's back. We have two of his pieces here. Pater Noster, or Lord's Prayer, written right around the time of Latvian independence, and The Fruit of Silence, which is this incredibly difficult exposed setting of a Mother Teresa text.
Right, moving from silence to prayer, faith, love, service, and peace.
Exactly. Now, Vasks is famous for using pure, beautiful consonants, but suddenly shattering it with brutal, agonizing dissonance. Based on everything we just talked about, is this dissonance just an aesthetic choice, or is it secretly a documentary of their oppression?
Well, when you look at the historical interviews and the liner notes from this era, the sources explicitly frame his use of brutal dissonance as a sonic representation of the violence and oppression of the Soviet regime.
Wow.
And the moments of pure consonance are framed as representing nature, faith, and ultimate peace. Now, I do need to jump in and explicitly state to you listening, as we unpack this, we're simply conveying the historical context and the ideas from the original source material.
Right.
We aren't endorsing any political viewpoints regarding the occupation itself. We just want to objectively relay how the composer and the sources framed the blueprint of this music.
Which is so important to understand the intense environment that birthed these specific chords. It completely changes how you listen to the track. Those dissonant chords aren't just musical tension, they are carrying the weight of a nation's struggle. So from that intensely personal Baltic struggle, we see this choral movement push outward into absolute extremes. Let's look at how far the boundaries can be pushed, starting with extreme theology in Russia and then extreme technical recording perfection in America.
Let's dive into the Russian extreme first with Alexander Neifel.
Okay, mouthful.
He was born in 1943, evacuated to Tashkent. He is widely considered the most radical of all the Russian spiritual minimalists. His piece, O Comforter, performed by the Ledge Artist Choir, it tests the limits of human patience.
Because it's so slow.
Impossibly slow. It's built on extremely long, held single notes, and it's deeply rooted in the strict rules of the Russian Orthodox tradition, which completely forbids the use of any musical instruments. It is voices and voices alone, using modal Byzantine scales.
I always struggle with that concept, to be honest. Why artificially restrict the musical toolbox? Doesn't taking away the instruments make it significantly harder for a composer to build a massive emotional sound?
It definitely makes it harder, but it forces a completely different kind of innovation. When a composer can't rely on, say, a brass section to create power, they have to explore the absolute physical limits of human anatomy.
Oh, right.
That forced restriction is what birthed the famous Russian basso profondo.
The really, really low basses.
Exactly. Basses who sing notes so impossibly low that they literally vibrate the floorboards. When you strip away the instruments, the singers have to generate the entire foundation of the earth using only their vocal cords and the resonant cavities of their chests. It creates a raw, radical meditation that an orchestra simply cannot replicate.
You feel it in your bones rather than just hearing it in your ears. Okay, so that's the theological extreme. Let's flip the coin and look at the American extreme, which is all about high-res audio perfection. We have the South Dakota Choral performing a piece called O Salutaris Hostia.
Yes, and the text there is by Thomas Aquinas from 1264.
Right. But what makes this recording stand out is that this chamber choir is working with a boutique Dutch audiophile label called Pentatone.
And Pentatone specializes in ultra-high-resolution surround sound recording. This is music explicitly engineered for listeners who invest in highly calibrated, serious audio systems.
But what does that actually mean for the listening experience? Like, why do audiophiles care so much about capturing a choir in high res?
It's all about transparency. In a standard compressed audio file, the nuances get squashed together. but in a high-resolution surround recording, the illusion of the space is perfectly preserved.
So it feels like you're in the room.
Exactly. If you have the right setup, you aren't just hearing a wall of sound. You can close your eyes and pinpoint exactly where the altos are standing to your left, or hear the subtle intake of breath from the sopranos before a phrase begins. It takes a text from 1264 and makes it feel as immediate and present as someone whispering in your room.
It's the ultimate marriage of ancient text and futuristic technology. Which actually brings us to our final big question. We've talked about medieval texts, strict traditions, political revolutions. Yet this genre isn't just surviving as some academic museum piece. It is thriving today.
Capturing the social media generation, no less.
Exactly. How did ancient slow music conquer the hyper-fast algorithms of TikTok and Instagram?
By offering stunning technical innovation and cinematic warmth that literally stops the scroll. We see this brilliantly in the music of Eric Eschenvalds.
He's another Latvian composer, right? Born in 1977.
Yes, and his piece Stars is a setting of an American poem by Sarah Teasdale. It's about the feeling of standing under the night sky, feeling incredibly small but deeply steady.
And the technical innovation he uses in this piece is just mind-blowing. Instead of a traditional organ or piano accompaniment, Eschenwalds underlays the entire choir with a continuous, shimmering drone produced by tuned wine glasses.
Yes, played with wet fingers.
It's amazing. They fill the glasses with exact measurements of water to get specific pitches. It sounds like someone managed to build a celestial synthesizer entirely out of water and glass.
It really does. The acoustic friction of the wet glass creates a pure sine wave. When you combine that alien, glassy hum with the warmth of the human voices, the effect is otherworldly.
And visually, it's so striding. A choir gently rubbing wine glasses while they sing. It became massive on social media. It's an undeniable hook.
And we see another side of this modern appeal with Ola J-Lo. He's a Norwegian composer based in New York. He manages to bridge the gap between sacred minimalism and cinematic pop culture.
Right. On our playlist, we have his piece Ubi Caritas, sung by Voices 8. The text is a Latin antiphon traditionally sung during Maundy Thursday foot washing, tracing back to a 9th century chant. But what is an antiphon exactly?
It's basically a call and response chant. One group sings a line and another group answers.
But J-Lo doesn't make it sound ancient at all. He takes that floating chant melody and harmonizes it using this unique intersection of rich jazz harmony and film music lushness.
Yes, it's incredibly lush.
Now, I know some classical music purists and critics complain that J-Lo's music is, I think the quote is, too easy on the ear, lacking that brutal dissonance we heard in Vasquez. But audiences adore him. Why is the modern, supposedly entirely secularized, tech-obsessed listener so drawn to these lush, sacred minimalism sounds?
It all comes back to where we started. It is an antidote to modern noise. When your entire day is fragmented by alerts and bite-sized content, a piece of music that demands 8 unbroken minutes of slow, breathing harmony is a radical change of pace.
It's like a neurological reset.
Exactly. It physically forces your nervous system to downshift. It's not just entertainment for a lot of listeners, it's a way to process a loud, chaotic world.
Let's do a quick recap of the incredible journey we just took. We started with a rebellion against the mathematical, anxiety-inducing atonal music of the mid-20th century. That rebellion revived thousand-year-old choral traditions.
Then we saw how those ancient chords fueled a literal, nonviolent revolution in the Baltic states.
Right. We explored extreme sonic experiments from strict Russian basses shaking the floorboards to ultra-high-resolution American audio engineering. And finally, we saw how tuned wine glasses and cinematic warmth eventually conquered social media algorithms.
It is a phenomenal arc. From the dim light of a medieval chapel to the glow of a smartphone screen, the core human need for this kind of communal harmony really hasn't changed.
It really hasn't. And for you listening right now, it is a great reminder. When the world feels too loud, too fast, and entirely chaotic, you don't necessarily need to completely unplug. Sometimes the best thing you can do is put on a great pair of headphones, find an audiophile recording of holy minimalism, close your eyes, and just listen to the space in the room. Let the architecture itself calm you down.
And that leaves us with a fascinating final thought to mull over. We've established that the spiritual minimalism of the late 20th century emerged as a direct, visceral reaction against the anxiety and harsh dissonance of that specific era.
Every musical era reacts to the one before it.
Exactly. So as we look to the horizon, What completely new kind of musical movement will emerge to reflect or rebel against the hyper-connected AI-driven noise of the next 50 years?
Oh, that's a great question.
Will we crave an even deeper, more radical form of silence, or will we need a completely new sonic language entirely?